So we're talking about package naming. And so for starters, the link that you had shared yesterday, Tim, that was sort of the documentation from DZ about how to, I'm assuming DZ, about how to initially set up a package registry, does have some notes on naming, but they're very, very base. And so the overall idea is that, as you mentioned, there's three levels. There's the instance level, the group level, and the project level. And so the instance level, the reason to have instance level is because if you wanted to share things out in the public, we need to have ways to differentiate between multiple projects that may want to have the same name. And so the way we're doing that right now, is most prominent in Maven and will match in Conan, is that we use the project's path, which is unique to the project, within the package name. So that works because there's 100% no chance that you're going to have two projects with the same path, because that's enforced. And so if someone tries to do an install on a given project or on a given package name, like, it will always be easy to find that package, even if you don't know who owns it, for example. So at the group level, that takes a step inward where you provide some sort of identifier about the group. And this is kind of the change we made with NPM. We moved NPM from the instance level to the group level in order to handle subgroups. So if you recall, we had discussed two options with NPM. One was create like a delimiter separated name using the full path of the project, and use that as part of the package name. So you'd have like a really long package name, and that spells out the whole path. And that was kind of like, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's long. Nobody's going to ever remember those. Sure, it would work with CI and automation like that. But in terms of being able to remember and look things up quickly and jot things down, it's not very useful. And also with NPM, there's a problem of NPM doesn't allow for the slashes that are within a path. And certainly a full path of a project might have many, many slashes. So to get around that, we just said, okay, well, we're just going to enforce the top level group name or namespace. And then from there, there can't be any duplicate names underneath that namespace. And so NPM is kind of working at the group level right now to an extent, whereas Maven has both. So you can use a full path and it will be found, or you can use a group ID or group name in the similar sense as what we have set up for NPM. Does that make sense so far?
It does. I have one clarifying question about NPM. Was it that they didn't allow any slashes, or that they limited the number of slashes?
You could have one slash, but that was specifically used by NPM to denote the separation between the scope and the package name itself. So we made it so that the scope matches the top group level name or namespace, and then the package name can be anything you want.
That was clever. I think Composer limits the number of slashes to one or two or something like that.
And Conan is the same way. You can slashes are important in the naming as well. However, Conan also in working through Conan, I discovered that we can use a plus sign as a delimiter between the path, and that won't create any issues because pluses are not allowed in project names on GitLab, I believe. I actually probably should double check that. And so that's the instance level endpoints for Conan, or instance level package names for Conan is going to include the plus separated path of a project.
Okay, I think that's okay. And I mean, we can confirm, but I think you can't use plus signs in the project name.
Yeah, I just need to check that just to make sure it's like the same for packages and groups and all of those names. And so moving forward on Conan, the next step would be adding a group level. And that would be similar to NPM, where the piece that we're using right now, where we require the full path, I would probably set it to just require that top level group name. And then from there, everything just has to be unique within that group.
Can I make like a very dumb question, but it's hammering my head. Why do we need all these? Like, why can't I just host, like, I create an arbitrary package name, even if it already exists? Let's say it's a popular NPM package, and I'm deciding to use the same name. Maybe I'm patching the thing myself, and I just want to host inside my account. Like, why can't I do that? Why do we have all these restrictions and rules?
So the sort of root behind that, it's kind of similar to actually the same problem you might see on NPM, but we can kind of get to that. So the root behind that is that packages are identified by their project. So they're directly related to the project. So if you're creating a package, you have to have a project that the package is made from. So in order to identify where that package exists in GitLab, we need to be able to identify the project and decide if you have permissions to read that project, because we allow for private projects, and that's what ties in whether or not the package is going to be private as well. So what happens is, if you wanted a package name, like if you just wanted a package, let's just say like Gigi's package, and that's what you wanted to call it, and that's all you wanted to call it, you didn't want anything else included. What if one of our customers or another user somewhere else wanted to create a package called Gigi's package? You've already got the name taken, so they can't. But at some customers, they might very specifically need that because it already exists for them, or they don't care about the external packages. They want to be able to name the packages their own very specific names within their company. And so that kind of, especially on GitLab.com, ties us down to, we have to have some way to make these unique.
Right, I kind of get that. But why can't we just have like, so when you're setting up your environment, like, okay, I'm gonna configure where this package come from, right? So I'm gonna put the GitLab URL. Why isn't that URL scoped to the project instead of the package being scoped?
So that is how the Maven that's how the Maven package manager is set up. So you can use your source URL, your registry URL, and you can set it. You could use the project ID, and that will say, hey, I'm only going to look for projects or for packages within this project. You can use the group ID, and then when you try to download packages, it will only look for packages within that group. Or you can use the generic GitLab URL that has no identifying characteristics, and that will be open to anything you have access to on GitLab. So that is sort of the idea of how we should set these up, is that there should be a different endpoint for each of those. The trick is, and we've seen this with some of the customers, is that they don't want to configure these large numbers of registry endpoints. They want to just be able to use one for their entire company, for example. So what happens if they have different groups that are not under one parent group? They want to have access to them. So there's like little edge cases like that.
I see.
And this kind of comes back to what I've talked with Tim about, where one possibility that we could look at is we treat self-managed instances separate and give them the option to flip a switch to say that you can name any package on the instance anything you want, because they're the only ones using the instance. They know who's using it. They know what their packages are. So they should be able to use very distinct package names and not have to tie them to anything in particular. And that's one thing that's kind of like been talked about, but not really looked into too deeply.
I see. So you kind of see like GitLab as a global host of packages. It's not just a project.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we did that, then we could still warn them. Like, so if I tried, let's say we're at the same instance and we create the GG package, it already exists. I could still get a warning saying, sorry, that name already exists.
Yeah.
You have to call it something else. So it's not like it would cause problems. And if we have, now that we have this like group level view into the package UI, they could go in and see maybe what we need then is an instance level view of of the packages.
Yeah, I think that could be pretty cool. I think there's like some security and some limitation concerns with like GitLab.com. Like kind of, I feel like if you make a public project and your package is public, anyone should be able to find it and use it if they want to. It's open source pretty much. Yeah, I think that would be a very cool thing to do. It's kind of like I'm trying to think of like how that would work, and it's still a little abstract. I feel like all of this is still a little abstract. Like even talking through how these different endpoints point to the repository, I'm like, wait, is that how it actually works? It is.
I think that would be a really cool idea, and it gives us the opportunity to be like, sorry, apparently it's eating time for my dog, so he's letting us all know. It allows us to really create that social aspect of the registry if we're able to do that, at least on the instance level, which I know is more what Sid, I just talked to Nick a little bit about this, and Sid mentioned he's not really interested in us doing as much the open source, like making sure that every package created lives on GitLab. But we do want to do inner sourcing. We want our enterprise customers to be able to say, okay, here's all of our packages in one place, and you could consume them and share them and see what's popular and see different versions and things like that. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I think that the solution to that is find a way to provide that instance level access on self-managed especially. And then on GitLab.com, just make sure that we always keep in mind the group endpoints, because that's as high level as you can get if you have multiple groups on GitLab.com.
Okay, and so to summarize, and we could still change our mind, but it sounds like what we're thinking is two different experiences for GitLab.com users and self-managed users. And self-managed we would provide more flexible naming conventions where we didn't tie them to use the specific group instance and group level identifiers in the endpoint.
Yeah, like the idea would be that it's not like necessarily different behavior. It's more that the self-managed has one more additional sort of behavior that they can fall within, which is they can loosen the naming restrictions at the instance level.
I like that idea. And so what would we have to do for NPM, which I know we changed to work for a group? Like, what would the change be like to do that?
I think it's difficult to think about. Like I'm like trying to think of the technical aspect of what's happening there. So NPM only has one endpoint right now. So I think there's a couple. So I think what we should do probably is go through and add the secondary endpoint that isn't there right now, which, well, let me think about this, because the endpoint we have is pretty much an instance level endpoint. So all we really need to do is there's the validations set up on the naming. We need to just add a way to disable those validations when someone has that disabled flag like set to off on their instance.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then probably add some additional like ways to warn them, so it's not just like a big error and stuff doesn't work.
And one other thing, you mentioned the documentation that we have, and I think the documentation for creating net new integrations. And it talks a little bit about naming conventions in there as well, right? So we would probably want to. It doesn't kind
well,
of.
it's so actually the documentation that I linked to. There's a section where it says group level and instance level endpoints are good to have but optional. To avoid name conflict for instance level endpoints, we use the package naming convention, and that points to the documentation that I removed the instance level names from. So it's kind of there's a little disconnect in there, but yeah.
And okay, and so it sounds like that could be updated. So if I create an issue, that could be part of maybe that's a separate issue to update that.
Yeah, I think that's just a minor documentation change. And
then we still are going to have this case sometimes where we're only allowed so many slashes, right? Like with Conan. And so it sounds like our preference is we have two things, and for GitLab.com and for self-managed. And then we have for integrations that allow slashes and that don't allow slashes. And then we have, that's really it. Yeah, and it'll be sort of any special character that the package manager uses in a special way. We just kind of have to be on the lookout for if we use those in specific ways, or if we allow them in our project names, but they don't allow them in their package names, like all sorts of stuff that could cause confusion. We just need to make sure that we understand what those overlaps are.
If you're, Steve, when you've been looking at, say, Conan, for example, because I know you started that, is that part of your issue template that you've been sort of working on, of like, hey, when you're analyzing, check for, special characters and their significance in the actual naming conventions, those sorts of things?
I don't think I've written that in there yet. I should add that. I'm sorry about the dog barking. Someone's
now I wish I had a dog, so I could also participate in the dog barking in the background experience.
It's almost, well, he's eating now, but like every day at 4:30 he like gets up out of his bed and comes over and is like trying to be cute and playful, and then if you ignore him he'll start barking. So it's like who owns who here? I don't know.
Well, depends how many tricks your dog's taught you, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been, I think this is very helpful for me. I'm probably going to go back and listen to this a couple of times and make sure I understand it more fully. But then do you think it's worth opening an epic or maybe an issue and a bunch of sub issues or something like that? Like, I'm wondering what the best way to tackle the problem is. Like, we could start with Maven, which one of our customers asked us for. Or we could start with NPM. That's like more top of mind for us.
I think, yeah, it's really just like starting with one and kind of seeing what's involved in like working through it and seeing what's involved in opening up those validations and such, and kind of like deciding from there how it's going to work.
Okay. And another thing we mentioned was the instance level UI as being another potentially useful thing to open, another issue to open up.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that could be useful. And I think that's going to, like, I think the long-term idea of package discovery, I think in one of the epics, there's something about, like being able to search for packages and such in a better and faster way. And so I think that's going to kind of tie in with that a little bit.
Yeah, I like this idea. I feel like I feel much better after this meeting, because I really like when we were talking about it. I was talking about it with some customers, and then some other people were asking about it in an issue, and I was like, my head just started spinning. But I feel like that was a very great explanation. Thank you.
I don't know. I feel like I start talking about these and I'm like, wait a minute, am I doing that?
Yeah.
Like, am I even doing that? What I just told you that we should do? Better make sure.
Yeah, well, we
Well,
could always double check. But
Yeah.
it was helpful for me too. I'm new to all this stuff.
Yeah, it's good to kind of just like flesh it out and make sure that we all have a common understanding of what's going on to begin with, and then also what we're capable of doing.
cool. Well, thank you. And I have some follow-up items, mainly some issues to create. I think in the issue, I'll make sure that I document our preferences for how we name them and what the strategy is. And I appreciate feedback, Steve and Gigi, in that issue. And more to come after that.
I haven't actually really read that closely in the composer issue. What were the things that were coming up with naming that kind of caused this conversation to take place?
Basically, like the way that we were doing the group level validation, that they don't support multiple slashes, so that it wouldn't work. And
Gotcha.
The contributor, I don't know their full name, but Ocho Rocho, if you're watching, is he was saying, well, I was just going to do it at the instance level to start, or just do it at the project level to start, because in our documentation it says instance and group level endpoints are optional but nice. So I think they were working on that first, but we know that we're going to want to expand it to group level. So I want to make sure that we're helping Ocho Rocho, and that we're also like have a standardized way for how we approach these things. And I didn't feel like I was leading us in that direction. I didn't feel like, oh, we're following the same, NPM is different, Maven's different, Conan's different. And so I just want to like level set across all of them.
Yeah, this is super helpful for me too. I've been like off in Conan land, so it's good to come back to center and make sure that I'm thinking about things from the bigger perspective.
Okay, Dan, anything to add?
No, that was pretty good value for me too. I've managed to sit down with Steve in person, weirdly, within the last week. And so I'm well aware of Steve's pretty great ability to explain stuff like this. So
So patient.
thanks very much.
I'm going to stop recording.